Have you ever looked at the sheer chaos of modern society? The endless cycles of outrage, that creeping feeling of losing your grip on personal autonomy, and wondered if something deeper, something almost systemic, is driving all this instability? Well, welcome. Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're examining a truly fascinating, deeply complex set of documents that outline exactly that, an existential societal threat, which the author describes as the Radiohead Crisis. But rather than just diagnosing some modern dystopian nightmare, these texts propose a highly structured, radical, and honestly kind of utopian antidote. It's a profound deep dive into an alternative framework for society, and we're going to unpack exactly how these source materials claim we can cure our modern instability. According to the source texts, which are framed as a confidential operational briefing from an organization called the Stellarium Foundation, humanity is facing a clandestine attack. They call this the Radiohead Crisis. And to be clear, this isn't just some clever metaphor for bad politics. The text outlines an ongoing event involving literal neural implant subversion, mass psychological programming, and even body hijacking. All of this is supposedly orchestrated by a shadowy, monolithic entity referred to simply as the Syndicate. The authors claim the Syndicate uses advanced psychological levers and technological exploits to completely override free will and essentially script human behavior. It paints this incredibly chilling sci-fi picture of a world where individual autonomy is under a severe, unseen assault, which really offers a radical lens to view our very real current societal anxieties. To make sense of this massive framework, we'll objectively map it all out. Our agenda today. First, the Radiohead Crisis. Second, breaking the hive mind. Third, the Stellarium defense. Fourth, the universal standard. Fifth, engineering global prosperity. And finally, number 6, the ultimate choice. Part 1. The Radiohead Crisis. The threat of the hive mind. The absolute core of this threat is the total erasure of individuality. We see a stark dichotomy here between two entirely incompatible ways of living. On one side, you have the Syndicate's model, which the author calls the dungeon system. The text claims this system is fueled by cruelty, extreme control, and these cheap, immediate dopamine hits. Why? Well, because keeping people addicted, outraged, and constantly reactive makes them compliant. It molds them into a manageable hive mind that just can't think for itself. Positioned directly against this is the Stellarium defense. This is a system rooted in creation, slow wealth accumulation, individual sovereignty, and liberty. The argument here is that you can't just fight the dungeon system with more destruction. You have to shift the paradigm entirely by accumulating resources to forge a literal and metaphorical shield of personal freedom. Moving on to Part 2, Breaking the Hive Mind, the Psychological Counteroffensive. The Foundation frames individual sovereignty as the ultimate psychological defense. The text explicitly states, "You are not just a node." And honestly, the emotional weight of that realization is the turning point of the entire manifesto. The author argues that the absolute best antidote to becoming a cog in a totalitarian hive mind is just waking up to the fact that every single individual possesses the innate ability to thrive and think independently. Where the purported Syndicate insists you have no power and no options, the Stellarium framework insists you always have a choice. Reclaiming that agency? That is step 1 to dismantling societal control. To actually achieve this autonomy, the text outlines a highly structured framework called the Liberation Protocol. It demands individuals actively move through 5 distinct steps. First up, recognize the conditioning. The text notes that the numbness a lot of people feel today is actually just a protective psychological adaptation to the constant horror of the system, so you have to wake up from it. Second, actively reject participation in systems that demean you or strip your autonomy. Third, connect with others who see the truth. The text suggests using secure channels and aliases to find allies. Fourth, build something positive, whether that's a small business, a community garden, or even art. Creation is the direct antidote to the Syndicate's destruction. And finally, protect yourself. This could mean building physical Faraday cages to block electronic intrusion, or simply adopting these principles as an unshakable psychological shield. Part 3. The Stellarium Defense, Shifting the Paradigm. So, the Foundation posits that just surviving isn't enough. You cannot out-protest a broken system, you have to out-build it. The source material explicitly shifts the strategy from a reactive, defensive state into a highly proactive stance of construction and wealth creation. Founder John Victor acknowledges that, creation is vastly harder than destruction, and building is way slower than breaking. But he insists that building accumulates value. It creates a solid foundation that ultimately outlasts the easy, immediate gratification of the Syndicate's model. This right here is where the text pivots from being just a personal survival manual into a grand blueprint for an entirely new society. The crucial engine driving this new society is the Foundation's ultimate law, their master directive. It strictly states you must make money, have fun, and do good. And the text is incredibly firm that these three imperatives must be executed simultaneously if we are going to cure modern societal instability. Think about it. A charity that does immense good but constantly goes bankrupt? It ultimately collapses and helps no one. Conversely, a highly profitable enterprise that exploits its workers or the environment, that just fuels the exact misery and instability the syndicate thrives on. Every single action, business venture, or project has to hit all three targets. If you're doing good and making money, but you're absolutely miserable, the action is considered wrong and must be adjusted or abandoned. It's pitched as this brilliantly pragmatic approach to sustainable living. Which brings us to part 4, the universal standard, the ethical boundary. To ensure that Master Directive doesn't accidentally collapse into ruthless exploitation, they introduce a rigorous ethical boundary. Before any action is taken, it's subjected to a strict 4-part decision protocol. First, does it violate the universal standard? This explicitly prohibits killing, stealing, coercion, or bearing false witness. If yes, you must immediately stop. Next, does it do good? If no, stop. Does it create value? If no, stop. Is it positive engagement? If no, stop. The texts assert this isn't just philosophical posturing, it's a functional mechanic. They argue that societies honoring these boundaries naturally prosper and innovate, while those that violate them inevitably plunge into chaos, poverty, and become the very dystopian nightmares this text warns against. Part 5, Engineering Global Prosperity, Concrete Macroeconomics. Moving from abstract philosophy to concrete macroeconomics, the documents outline a massive societal shift they refer to as the elevation to Eden. This is where the principles meet real-world policy. The sources describe this as a rapid transition into a post-scarcity reality. They advocate for leaning entirely into the technological curve, deploying AI and robotics to automate intensive, mundane labor across all industries. Now, the goal here isn't to create mass unemployment, but rather to free humanity from the simple drudgery of survival. Picture a society where the basics are automated so seamlessly that human capital is spent entirely on innovation, artistic expression, and managing an era of extreme, unprecedented abundance. To actually reach this post-scarcity world, the text proposes highly practical, structural socioeconomic blueprints under the banner of wealth activism. It's a fascinating look at how system engineering can solve deep-rooted economic instability. For example, they outline a subsidized jobs initiative. This is basically a massive economic buffer designed to safely transition workers who are displaced by AI, ensuring that disruption doesn't lead to starvation. Then there's the Enterprise Housing Pledge, which is this ingenious mechanism where public and private entities leverage their massive assets as collateral to fund the construction of affordable housing at scale. That directly attacks one of modern society's greatest pressure points. They even detail an entire cryptocurrency ecosystem called the water token. This isn't just digital money. It's an independent economic layer designed to seamlessly fund creators and builders who align with Stellarium values, effectively bypassing traditional and potentially corrupt financial gateways. Finally, Part 6. The ultimate choice, a call to action. The manifesto culminates by placing the responsibility of this massive societal transformation squarely on the shoulders of the reader. It moves from sweeping systemic analysis directly to personal accountability. The author emphasizes that every single choice matters. This is framed as the ultimate test of individual agency against a monolithic system. The text argues that the hive mind relies entirely on the illusion that your individual choices are meaningless, that you're just too small to make a difference. But the documents counter this with an empowering truth. When you deliberately refuse to participate, the syndicate loses a soldier. When you refuse to be outraged, the system starves. When you speak the truth, someone else finds the courage to do the exact same thing. And when you finally start to build, you create a tangible refuge for others to join. We'll leave you with the text's central ultimatum to ponder. In the face of the unseen forces, hidden controls, and systemic instability shaping our modern world, how will you respond? Will you passively accept the chaotic status quo of the hive mind? Or will you choose to disconnect, reclaim your sovereignty, and align with these principles to build a better, more prosperous future? It's a wildly provocative question that the Stellarium texts demand every reader answer for themselves. Thank you so much for joining me in exploring these fascinating documents.